Firstly, watch Dark if you haven't yet. Secondly, you may watch Stranger Things if you haven't yet. You may not watch it. But anyways, by watching both of them, you would experience firsthand the big difference between the American and European cultures. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this rather brief video, I'm going to inform you about the existence of a TV series called Dark, D-A-R-K, obviously, okay? So the thing is, I've watched it and another more well-known TV series called Stranger Things, almost like in a row, okay? And like I was struck how similar they are, right? They are very, very similar, but at the same time, they are very, very different. And it made me thinking, so I made this video eventually, like a couple of months later, actually. I've watched them like in January, I think. Could be even earlier. But anyways, so these two shows are very similar, but at the same time very different. So one is European, Dark, and another is American, Stranger Things, and both are on Netflix, by the way. And again, you've probably heard about Stranger Things, but I have doubts you have heard about Dark. You could have, you maybe even have watched it, but in case you didn't, this is the video to inform you about it, okay? This is the purpose of this video, mostly. So, as far as last I checked on Facebook, Stranger Things had 9.1 million likes, and Dark had 1.4, so that's more than 6 times less than Stranger Things. So, there you go. So, I think these shows represent a very good case study on what these different cultures, the European one and American one, focus on, like how they tell a very similar story, at least in its premise, a very similar story initially, right? So I would claim, this is my main claim of this video, is that you may describe the American take, the Stranger Things take, as superficial and sensationalist, aka the lie, whereas Dark would represent substantive and existential take, aka the truth. Alright? So superficial and sensationalist, the lie, versus substantive and existentialist, the truth. So Dark is really deeper and darker, no pun intended, and but also more wholesome on some level, you may say. So the American take, the Stranger Things take on this situation, I guess, would be something evil is nearby, so we have to be scared of it, you know, kind of. Versus a European take of something evil is within us, right? So we should be horrified by it. And I'll talk about this in a minute, about the difference between fear and horror, because I think this is there is a fundamental difference, all right? And it's partly represented by these series. So to some degree, you may say that Stranger Things also approach this evil is within kind of trope with their, season 4, where Vecna, this guy, whoever he is, appears to have created all these monsters. So, like they're kind of trying to give an overarching theme to the whole series, to all the seasons, how this guy actually caused everything. And this is a good idea, but we'll see how they spin it in season 5, all right? Because the show is not yet over, all right? So we'll see. And another indication of how deeper Dark is compared to Stranger Things is age rating, all right? So Dark is 18 plus and Stranger Things is 16 plus. It's not because of some like gore or whatever, but I mean, it's really dark. What can I say? Okay. So, yeah. And, obviously, I mean, I've had there are clearly such similarities that are very suspicious. So perhaps the creators of Dark were at least inspired by Stranger Things, but then again, they gave it a completely different spin. So the similarities are really strange. I mean, the Stranger Things came out in July 2016, right? The first season, and Dark was in December 2017. So almost a year and a half afterwards, right? So they could have been inspired by Stranger Things. That's what I'm saying, at least technically. And the both shows are about small towns, right? Hawkins in Stranger Things versus Winden in Dark. I mean, obviously one is an American town, another is a German town. And their basic premise is the disappearance of a young boy, also the same in both series. This is kind of what starts the plot rolling. Then both have this sort of like a secret cave, you know, the secret lab in Stranger Things and the nuclear power plant in Dark, okay? And they have actually a literal cave in Dark. I mean, this proverbial mythical cave where the hero has to descend in order to come back with the elixir, you know, to descend through the cave into the world of the dead, the world of meaning, as I call it, right, in my video, Perpendicular Worlds. See the link in the description. And by the way, speaking about the two different worlds, which again, both series are exploring to some extent, at least to a large extent, I would claim. So this other world, like Stranger Things approaches it through, I don't know, like some sort of kitsch almost kind of take, you know. They actually use Dungeons and Dragons terminology, right? So they're kind of admitting they're not super serious about it. It's just like some sort of a MacGuffin almost, right? Whereas in Dark, as compared to that, they approach this topic, this theme through well-known alchemical symbolism, actually. Like, the alchemical symbolism is really strong in Dark, and all this long philosophical, mystical tradition of Europe is not only Europe, I mean, obviously, Eurasia in general, and even Northern Africa. I mean, speaking of places like Egypt, etc., etc. It's represented there really well, at least on this sort of symbolic level, okay? Yeah, so, but in general, I would say Dark, like, what's the main kind of myth it plays around is, I would claim it's actually Oedipus Rex, right? Oedipus Rex, rather, in Latin. So the king Oedipus, right? The guy who killed his father and married his own mother. This old myth that Sophocles have written his most famous play about, right? So, but in the case of Dark, it's not just one person, this Oedipus, but rather it's a whole bunch of people in this horrible, I don't know, maelstrom of various, I don't know, atrocities, I guess would be the word. Like, check this out, just a couple of tidbits, all right? So there's a guy, he's actually the protagonist, who screws his own aunt, whatever is the pronunciation. Then she gets pregnant from him, and then he kills her. All right? That's one episode. Then the second episode is, there is a woman in Dark who is her own grandmother, and therefore her own granddaughter. So it's kind of bizarre at the very least, all right? So, like, it's kind of creepy, you know, to say the least, okay? So just to give you a taste of what Dark is, essentially, all right? So Stranger Things represents this sort of, like, again, I don't have any other word except kitsch. Like this kitsch-like mishmash of, like, various tropes and stories, like, just kind of bunched up together, whereas, again, Dark, it has this sort of old mythological volume behind it and inside of it. It just kind of magnifies it and kind of plays around it, like adding some elements to it. But the story is very deep and very old, essentially. That's what I'm saying, kind of. So yeah. Yeah, and what I promised, right? The difference between fear and horror. So I would say that Stranger Things, almost said Scary Things, right? So Stranger Things is like a scary movie. So it's a movie that is supposed to make you scared. Like there's something scary over there. We should be scared, right? The fear. It should incite fear. Whereas the Dark, it's actually a horror. I would call it a horror movie. And like, or a series, like whatever, like, it doesn't matter. So what's the difference between fear and horror? And, well, through some unhappy events in my own life very recently, I've actually learned the difference. So the difference is, once again, fear is when you have something to be afraid of, right? There's something scary. nearby or in your future or possible future, right? There's something to be afraid. Whereas horror is when everything is very bad, like very, very bad, and there is no way out. So this is dark. And fear is, Stranger Things. So, and like, just as a simple illustration of this, right? I was so annoyed when I watched Stranger Things by, like, it's almost they've had a quota on jump scares, right? Almost like every episode should have at least one jump scare. Even if there are no monsters in this particular episode, they would set up a scene where, like, a character would do something and then suddenly some other character would approach them and like, scare them, Like, it's so annoying. It's actually like, I can't stress that enough, how annoying it is. And this is fear, right? It's like being scared by something. Whereas again, horror is something fundamental. It's you realize like it's hopeless. Everything is really bad and there's no way out. Like, this is horror, okay? Versus fear. So, yeah. So Stranger Things had this comic book vibe to it, an American vibe essentially, right? And it's set up in a way that actually emphasizes this. Like the main timeline they have, actually kind of not the only, but the main timeline is 1980s, right? Which is almost deliberately chosen such to make everything appear slightly comic book-ish, slightly surreal, slightly phantasmagorical, you might say, right? Whereas in Dark, the main timeline is 2019 and 2020 to make everything appear kind of real and relatable, all right? But then again, the series itself came out in 2017, the season 1, right? And curiously, by the way, in Dark, they predict the apocalypse in 2020, which is very funny, if you know what I mean. We remember 2020 was a funny year. So yeah, but at the same time, Dark has different timelines going as far back as 1888, actually, and as far forward as 2053. So it's not like they're afraid of like going into other timelines. Actually, you would see when you watch the show. So they're not afraid at all. In fact, also just like they do in Stranger Things, in Dark, they also embrace this sort of, this difference in cultures along these different times. So you can see posters like when we're in 1950s, in 1980s again, in Dark also represented. You can see posters of famous shows of that time, etc., like the little figures of various characters, and stuff like that. Another similarity, by the way, is the annoying kids in Stranger Things. Like, it was like, oh my god, was almost impossible to watch because of these stupid kids. Like, it's so horrible. And in Dark, their main character is also incredibly annoying, but not in the same way as kids in Stranger Things are, but in a different way. He's just like, what's going on? And it's like 90% of screen time, like he spends like this, like, oh. But I mean, to be fair, as I've said, Dark is a horror. Like, it's actually like sort of appropriate to the way like his character is written. Like, this is probably how you would behave as well if you would get in a situation like this. All right. But generally in Dark, people look like and behave like actual people. Whereas again, in Stranger Things, they look like and behave like comic book characters, like caricatures essentially. And the storyline in Dark is incredibly complex with respect to Stranger Things. Actually, Stranger Things is not anywhere close. So, like, I kind of envy the ability of the writers. Like, they must have had some really complex schemes, that they've drawn in order to, like, tell this story in a comprehensible manner. Like, it's a really big achievement, believe me. Once again, watch the series, at least season 1, and you will see like how crazy it is. And even better seasons, all 3 seasons, then you would see like just what an incredible interwoven tapestry it is. Like, it's just like, I have no words to describe it. It's just really, really genius in this sense, at the very least. Like, how every piece fits together, and like, you can actually rewatch it I think. I haven't tried, but and you will kind of get a completely different picture, perhaps, because you will know how everything connects to each other. But I don't know. But anyway, the storyline is really great. The writing is really great. And by the way, like speaking of writing, like in purely technical sense, both shows are really great. All right. And like, why am I showcasing them both and comparing them to each other? Is because they're really well done. And by virtue of being such, again, they demonstrate the differences between Europe and America so well, because both of them represent what they wanted to represent really good, right? So really well. So again, returning to the interwoveness, right? The tapestry of the plot line, if you can call it that, even in Dark, I would claim for the benefit of my main message in this video that it represents, in this case, how incredibly complex Europe itself is compared to America, right? So yeah, there's also some deep philosophy in Dark, not present in Stranger Things, obviously, but you don't need really my commentary here. You just have to watch the series yourself. You have to experience it existentially, firsthand, so to speak. Then you would get it on your own. Like, believe me, you wouldn't need my own commentary. You would certainly get something out of it, at the very least, because once again, it's the truth in this sense. As true as a piece of art could be, Dark is true. And as fake as a piece of art could be, Stranger Things are. All right. So the main takeaways from this video, to conclude, is: firstly, watch Dark if you haven't yet. Secondly, you may watch Stranger Things if you haven't yet. You may not watch it. But anyways, by watching both of them, you would experience firsthand the big difference between the American and European cultures. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing. If you wish to support me, please consider joining my Patreon. That is patreon.com/philosopher. See the link in the description. Or if you have a scientific theory of your own and you'd like my help in developing it, please join my alternative science coaching program, also available through Patreon.